Right, well, I'd just like to welcome all of you who've taken time out of your busy evening and this holiday month to join us for a webinar on how to ensure a healthy brain for the rest of your life and hopefully prevent a lot of the damaging things that happen to brains over the aging process. I'd like to welcome Eric Colette here with me from A Mind for All Seasons, who's amazing. He's been in treating memory care for several decades, and he is an expert. And I'm just honored to be able to share the platform with him tonight and share some information with you guys tonight. And the reason I put this together, I mentioned in my email, is I just get so many questions every single day about how, some of it's for you specifically, but for some of it's for loved ones or aging parents. How do we know how to assess if our aging parent truly has Alzheimer's? Is there anything we can do to prevent it? And I just wanted to share some of the research that I've been studying over the last several years. And as I've had a chance to have several discussions with Eric, we've just really have a very similar mindset and approach. And I thought, this is something I want to get out to my patients. Just for your information, I have actually gone through this protocol myself. And I've, as healthy as I've thought I've been, there were still several things that I was able to learn and discover about my own brain, which made me realize there's more I can do to decrease inflammation, improve my brain function, and decrease the risk that I'll have cognitive decline and into neurodegeneration in the next several decades. So welcome, Eric.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's great to be with you. And it's great to be with all of you who patiently waited and came through a broken link to get here and to join us. So we're going to do everything that we can to make it worth your while. I appreciate Dr. Smith's introduction and just want to share with you a little bit about my background so that you know the viewpoint that I come at this from. I started working with seniors living with Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia in the year 2000. I was working in the assisted living industry, and I did that for 16 years. Most of that time I spent as an executive director running assisted living and memory care settings. And it was hard. It was very difficult. I felt at times like I was running the morgue waiting room. In a typical memory care community, you lose about a third of your residents every year because Alzheimer's disease is typically considered a terminal illness. It's also one of the most feared things on the planet. Now, we're not just going to talk about Alzheimer's disease tonight, so I don't want to scare anybody off. We're going to talk about cognitive decline in general. But I have learned over the course of my career and in everything that I've studied and everything that we've done in our work here at A Mind for All Seasons, I've learned that Alzheimer's disease should be very rare. It is largely preventable. And that's actually not my statement. That's a bold statement to make, but that's a statement that comes from some of the top neurologists in the world. And the research has advanced dramatically in the last several years. So we want to paint a picture that helps you be empowered to know exactly what you can do to take care of your brain and live at home for the rest of your life and enjoy your family. And certainly nobody's going to prevent death. That comes to all of us. And we never know how much life we have left, but we want to put as much life in the years that we have left for as many people as possible. So consider for a minute the typical experience of the aging adult. As we get older, we joke about going over the hill. And we all know that if you go up the hill, it's pointed upward, but if you go over the other side, it's downward. And it feels like, oh, we're just on this downward slope. And for some, it's pretty steep, and for others, it's a little bit more of a gentle glide slope into late adulthood, and ultimately we reach the end of our life. Along the way, there's kind of an expectation that you sort of cross this threshold where things just start to fall apart and things don't work well, including memory. And so many things as we age related to our memory get tossed off as aging. We joke about brain farts. We joke about senior moments. And inwardly, maybe it's not a laughing matter to us. We're a little bit worried because our identity is wrapped up in our ability to remember things and to process things cognitively and to focus and concentrate and grapple with information. Who we are as adults is all wrapped up in all of those cognitive abilities. And when they slip, it doesn't feel good. Well, a lot of times as people get older, they start noticing some slipping. And if they're brave, they talk to their doctor about it, who then might do a pencil and paper test. And those tests are not all that sensitive. You have to be pretty impaired to have a problem show up on that test. And so often the doctor will come back and say, well, you're fine. You know, you are getting older, as if it's just normal for things to really start declining. So people go back home and they go about their life, and then things are getting worse, and maybe their family members are noticing some further slipping. So they go back in and the doctor says, well, technically you've got mild cognitive impairment, which doesn't sound all that bad, but it's anything but mild. It's like the equivalent of stage 3 cancer. Most people don't realize it, but Alzheimer's disease is at work in the brain for 10 to 20 years before the symptoms even show up. And by the time the symptoms are bad enough to be classified as mild cognitive impairment, which is measurable, then it's really bad. It's really progressed. So it's not mild. But people go back home and maybe the doctor gives them a prescription for Aricept to try to slow things just a little bit. But most of the time that really doesn't do a whole lot. And there's some nasty side effects for some people. And so then eventually things get worse and they go back into the doctor and the doctor says, wow, yeah, you have dementia. And I talked to a client about 2 years ago about what it was like for she and her husband to go in and for him to get an Alzheimer's diagnosis at a neurologist's office. And she said, it was kind of like the neurologist put us in a boat, took away the oars and shoved us out on a rough sea and said, good luck. That is such a good description in my mind of what I have heard from family after family after family for the last 21 years. And it's time to do better for people. We can do better for people. So instead of accepting this aging trajectory and the sobering statistics that go with it, we can do something more. Just to put it in perspective, 1 in 9 adults that are 45 and older report having some kind of a decline in cognitive functioning. 1 in 3 seniors will die with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. And right now, more than 6 million people are living with Alzheimer's. And that number is projected to more than double by 2050. Those aren't good statistics. Our healthcare system is already tapped out. We are stretched to the limit. We have to do more. But there's no magic pill. Alzheimer's disease researchers have spent trillions of dollars trying to figure out a cure. There have been over 400 drug trials in the last few decades, and not one of them cures the disease. Many companies have started pulling out of Alzheimer's research, including Pfizer in 2018. This is what Alzheimer's disease looks like. And other types of cognitive decline may affect the brain a little bit differently, but they all involve neurodegeneration. The brain is actually deteriorating in a way. With Alzheimer's disease, the brain loses 50 to 70% of its mass by the time it gets into late stages. Can you imagine losing more than half your brain? That's devastating. And it doesn't just affect memory. Most people think of Alzheimer's or dementia in general as a memory problem. No, memory's involved, but Alzheimer's disease affects every aspect of our functioning. And a late stage Alzheimer's patient is just like a newborn. They can urinate, they can defecate, they can cry, but they can't roll over on their own. They generally can't swallow anything except thickened liquids, so no solid foods. Usually they can't speak, and if they do speak, they can only say a handful of words. So it's pretty devastating to the brain. It's a slow form of brain death. But one of the things that we've learned in the last couple of decades is that the part of the brain that is attacked first by this process, the area where it first shows up, the memory center of the brain, down here, the hippocampus, is a very active part of the brain. There are 700 to 1,400 new brain cells produced in the hippocampus every day for the average adult. And yet, by late stage Alzheimer's disease, that part of the brain is shrunken into a crater. How do you get to the point where an area of the brain that is producing new brain cells every day starts looking like a crater. Well, it's kind of what would happen if you sloughed off skin cells faster than your body could produce them, or if you lost bone cells faster than your body made them. No, we call that osteoporosis. And as far as a skin condition, well, it'd be devastating. We need our skin. In the brain, it's like an osteoporosis of the brain, a synaptoporosis. We're losing brain cells faster than they're being formed. Now, I mentioned earlier mild cognitive impairment and the fact that it's not really mild. Dr. Smith is an expert in looking at people's brains and meeting with them and understanding how it is that they're functioning and what can be done to help them do just a little bit better. So he's going to talk us through some of the things that he looks at and some of the terms that we use to try to put a little bit more of this in perspective.
Okay, so the interesting thing about mild cognitive impairment, as Eric mentioned, is that it's very similar to the diagnosis of mild traumatic brain injury. Mild traumatic brain injury is not life-threatening like a stroke is or a brain tumor, but it can literally destroy your life. It doesn't describe the symptom severity, it just describes how life-threatening it is. So if you look at mild traumatic brain injury as compared to the cognitive impairment side, you lose the ability to sleep. You might have physical symptoms. You might have emotional symptoms. And then you end up having cognitive symptoms as well. And it all has to do with some trauma that happened to the brain, whether or not you even hit your head. The way they quantify in the research in the literature, mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, all you have to do is have a mild impairment of 2 or more cognitive domains. And if we compare that to Alzheimer's dementia diagnosis, you'll end up losing 2 or more, loss of 2 or more cognitive domains. Plus, you end up losing ability to function in activities of daily living. Things like eating, cleaning, personal hygiene, transportation, learning, all the things that we do on a daily basis. Definitely working is out of the question. But those are the type of things that occur. So the difference between MCI and AD, Alzheimer's, is more about daily activity. So most people with mild cognitive impairment, they've noticed it before they have this diagnosis, but they also usually tend to hide it if they can. And the 6 cognitive domains that they are listing are things to do with executive function, which involves planning and coordinating different activities, running your calendar, learning and memory, remembering short-term events like conversations you've had with family members a day or 2 before or even that morning, and also whether or not you took your pills, whether or not you took a shower that day, and then things like perceptual motor function, which includes things like balance and coordination, so you can get dressed and do the buttons on your shirt and put your one leg through the pant leg before the other leg and do that all in sequence. Complex attention is what I hope you guys are able to do right now, is pay attention to some complex material. But language, when people start to forget words, this is something that I see many brain injury patients tell me is they just have word finding issues. The words are there floating in their head, but they can't remember to actually use them in the conversation. And then the social cognition, people who start to have effects in this domain, they just start to not function very well socially. The relationships tend to fade because they just don't engage. And because they don't engage, they feel more embarrassed and they just feel more isolated. And so you can see some of the details on these different cognitive domains. But if you take any 2 of these and you get rid of them and add a difficulty with functioning on a day-to-day basis, that's where you have an Alzheimer's diagnosis. But you can have slight problems in each of these areas, and then you'll start to notice that in your life as well. So the thing that I always like to, I much prefer to have people prevent brain injuries if possible. I'd rather prevent mild cognitive impairment if possible. If there's ways that we can detect that there's a way to eliminate that or stave it off or slow that process down, I am interested in doing it. My personal experience with getting the training that I've received in neurodegeneration and the clinical protocols involved with treating it has to do with my own personal background. I was adopted when I was 7 years old. but my birth grandfather died of severe Parkinson's. And I heard it was just a horrible, long process for him. And I've since had treated numerous patients. Some of them have passed on. And I even had an aunt just recently passed away from Parkinson's. And I could see all these things long before she actually received the diagnosis. So it's obviously much better to get rid of a problem if you can before it starts. But it starts with preclinical tests. And then, yes, if you have mild cognitive impairment, we can do things to change that. And once you have Alzheimer's disease and fibrillary tangles in the brain and this atrophy, it's not going away, but we can make some new connections, which, as Eric mentioned, the hippocampus is constantly regenerating. We just have to make sure that we are using those neurons so they can make new connections. So a test I use often with cognitive decline patients that come in is something called the MoCA test. I know I showed you that previous slide and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, how do you know if you're really losing those things? Well, we have a Montreal Objective Clinical Assessment, a cognitive assessment, and it goes through almost all of those domains, at least 5 of the 6. And it's so easy in some cases, but it's so sad when you see patients struggling to fill this out. I had a patient, a 52-year-old woman, just a week or 2 ago. We really struggled to get her through just number 1 and 2. How do you draw a clock? What comes after 1 and then A and then 2 and then B? And she could name 2 out of those 3 things, but she was really surprised. And her daughter, who's an adult, was extremely frustrated and scared when she realized how severe her mom's cognitive decline had become. So I just wanted to explain to you so you can think, okay, what are some of the earlier signs that my brain is aging? What are some signs that my brain is starting to become inflamed? One of them is just brain endurance. Things that you used to be able to do, things like driving, driving an hour or 2 to visit family, even driving out of state for several hours. You used to be able to do that and you'd be able to get there and be fine, but now you can't. You just feel totally overwhelmed. You used to be able to read for 1 or 2 or 3 hours a day. Now you read for 10 minutes and your brain is just toast. A lot of people, as I mentioned, cannot tolerate big family gatherings because the social energy that it takes to maintain the brain, following different conversations and talking to different people, it just puts them in a low endurance capacity. They just can't maintain all those normal functions. Some of the other earlier signs is difficulty with short-term memory. I think our so-called smartphones are sometimes making us less smart, but I really challenge all of us, including myself, to memorize more phone numbers and use them instead of just hitting a button and a name. You have to use those pathways if you want to maintain them. And then the other common early sign is difficulty with directions. You don't know which way to go. You might, maybe you're trying to find a new place. Of course, Google Maps tends to make us not need to remember all those directions as well now. But those are the early signs: less brain endurance, difficulty with memory, and then some problems with directions. So some of the more intermediate signs of an aging brain or an inflamed brain are problems with inability to focus or concentrate. In order to learn new tasks, you have to be able to focus. And in order to complete tasks, things like balancing your checkbook, things like focusing on a conversation that someone's having, you need to be able to do that. And a lot of people who are starting to show intermediate signs of aging brain can't even follow a plot in a TV show or a movie for more than 30 minutes. It just becomes too confusing to them. Now, a lot of the common areas which go to the brain that are controlled by the hypothalamus and the brainstem also tend to degenerate with aging brain and inflammation. And then this shows up as constipation. It's especially prevalent in people with Parkinson's. They have constipation because there's a degeneration and a loss of the neurons in the gut. And so they start to have chronic constipation for maybe 20 years before they ever have a Parkinson's diagnosis. And that's just not good, because if you maintain so much toxicity in the system, you're actually reabsorbing toxins, and that eventually makes its way to the brain. And then the final thing on the intermediate side is increased sympathetic tone. And sympathetic is just the balance between rest and digest and the fight or flight system. If you're have a lot of stress, you're going to have increased blood pressure. And this is such a common thing we see. But usually that happens 10, 20, 30 years before the degeneration of the brain starts. The heart rate will be higher. People get much more overwhelmed, busier, and then they end up having chronic poor blood flow, which is cold hands and feet. And they usually end up with fungal infections on their toes because the immune system can't make it to kill that fungus. And then a lot of the people, so you can test yourself if you have chronically cold hands and feet, and you're also probably going to have a chronically cold, quote unquote, brain. You're not getting blood flow to certain areas in your brain that really need it. So more significant signs of an aging brain or chronic brain inflammation, inability to work. You start to lose the things that make us identify with who we are. You know, what do you do? Oh, I'm a chiropractor. What do you do? I'm a nurse. I'm a attorney. I'm a, you know, whatever you do. I'm an accountant. Different things, we identify that as part of us, and we start to lose that ability. You also start to lose the ability to appreciate life. And then sometimes, I see this so often in men, but it happens in women as well. People don't even perceive that they've lost function, and it's their family members that are starting to tell them, hey, you're not, is everything okay? I'm fine, because no one wants to admit that they're getting old. And then once you go past brain inflammation and brain aging and start to go into neurologic deficits, that's when we start to see tremors, progressive weakness, and loss of balance. And those are can be insidious, because as you're getting weaker, your balance system tends to go down. And as you tend to go down, then you're actually at a higher risk to have a fall. And once you have a fall and fracture a hip or have a brain injury, usually within a year or two, it just hastens your demise. The final slide here is some of the more severe and things that are most feared. If you actually have expressed degenerative disease of your brain, you tend to start to lose bladder tone. You start to get bowel obstruction so severe that you may need surgery, and you literally can't digest food. It's interesting, I have this one with inability to taste or smell, when so many people with COVID over the past couple of years have started to lose that ability. And some people who've had it 2 years ago still don't have that ability back. And those neurons just on the medial temporal lobe are those olfactory neurons for smell are right there close. So if you lose the ability to taste and smell, you've started a process of degeneration that happens secondary to a viral infection. So we mentioned the social relationships, and then we get to the point of severe dependence on family to do everything for you. You can't feed yourself, you can't take your pills, you can't get up and exercise, you have to be reminded to go to the bathroom, and many of those things they just have to do for you from that point on. So this slide, it just sort of shows that downward spiral. The preclinical phase is what they call subjective cognitive impairment, an SCI, but it's preclinical. I highlighted in red that the individual may notice the change, but it's hard to detect it. And so this is the best time to start dealing with that problem. Get the labs done, get the exercises happening that you need to drive those areas of the brain that are dysfunctional. And that way you decrease your chance of going on to mild cognitive impairment. And then you're definitely delaying actually being diagnosed with dementia. So the question that I have for you is, what slide are you on? Are you even in that path? You know, where are you? And then what can we do to change the trajectory? I'll turn it back over to Eric.
Thanks, Dr. Smith. So the things that we've talked about so far can be a little bit discouraging. It can be kind of disheartening to hear about, oh, all this decline. Everybody knows that our bodies can go one way or the other. Things can be improving or things can be getting worse. And part of why we wanted you to understand the direction that it could go is to just appreciate the gravity of it. Because for a lot of people in the general public in this country, those things are tucked away behind closed doors. And unless you've dealt with it personally or it's been in your family, we just don't think about it as much. But it's something that we're all at risk for, and we can take action to follow a different pathway. we are very confident that we can change the trajectory. And think about what that gap is worth. If we level things out, and instead of just decline, and become dependent on others, if we can level things out, that's worth a lot in terms of quality of life. It's worth a lot in terms of functional ability. It's worth a lot financially. A memory care community nowadays costs about $6,000 to $10,000 a month. That's big dollars. That adds up fast. In fact, the lifetime cost of caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease is over $350,000, according to the Alzheimer's Association. So if we could level things out and help people be more functional and not go down that pathway, I don't know how you put a price tag on that kind of quality of life, but we can put a real price tag on what it means to society and to individuals who are already tapped out financially. Oftentimes, we can not just level things out, but it's pretty typical that we can improve cognitive functioning. Now, that's a bold statement to make, but I can tell you that from 2016 to the present, when I started A Mind for All Seasons and we really got into this kind of work, we have written hundreds and hundreds of treatment summaries and worked with patients all over the country. And I can't tell you how many times we have seen major improvement in cognitive scores, even for people that already have a dementia diagnosis. So our current healthcare approach is basically use drugs to treat neuropsychiatric symptoms, do some exercise, and maybe some cognitive training. And those things aren't necessarily bad. Definitely the exercise and the cognitive training have a role in improvement. But is it enough? I don't think so. I think there's a lot more. It's really time for a radically new approach. One of the reasons that we are stuck right now when it comes to Alzheimer's research, as it has been done by pharmaceutical companies, is that we've grown a little bit complacent. You see, in 1900, the average age at death was mid to late 40s. Now, that didn't mean that people were not living to be 100 or in their 90s or 80s. Plenty of people did. But the average was dragged down by the large number of women who died giving birth and the large number of people that died because of acute illness and infection, often the result of an injury. If you get your arm stuck in a hay baler and it becomes infected and you don't have antibiotics yet on the market, you're probably not going to make it. That's a bad situation. So the advent of monotherapies, one pill that could be given to someone to deal with a major issue that was the big glaring reason for the problem, led to really extending life. The advent of vaccines, the advent of antibiotics, the advent of microvascular surgery, all those things have allowed us to turn around a lot of significant health challenges. And over time, the gold standard for research became, oh, you pick one variable and you test it against placebo. And if it works, then you've got a winner on your hands. You've got something that's going to make a big difference in somebody's life. Let me give you a different analogy, though. It's kind of like you take your car to the mechanic. Let's say that you've got a 1980 Toyota and you don't want to spend money on a new car and you want to just keep that old car running. If you go to the mechanic and the mechanic goes through everything and finds out that your transmission is shot and you pay for a new transmission and that was the only thing that was wrong, you're golden. You can go out and drive the roads just fine. But what if the mechanic went through everything in your vehicle and came back with a list of 30 things that were wrong? And you looked at it and said, oh, wow, that's a lot of stuff. But, let's fix the transmission. I think it's too hard to do everything. Or what if the mechanic said, yeah, just fix the transmission? Well, obviously the car's not going to work if you got a blown head gasket and the radiator's leaking and the water pump is shot and you got a host of other problems. You have to fix everything on the list. Complex diseases, lifestyle diseases, things like type 2 diabetes and other metabolic disorders, things like heart disease, things like Alzheimer's disease are the things that people are dying from nowadays. We can keep people alive a lot longer, But what do the last few decades look like for way too many people? It's because for complex diseases, one pill is not going to solve the problem if the problem is caused by a multitude of factors. So let's explore this different approach. One of the pioneers in the field is Dr. Dale Bredesen. I don't need to read you his credentials, but he's a highly credentialed MD neurologist who spent most of his career at a research institute at UCLA that he helped to found, the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. He's published a lot of peer-reviewed articles and is a worldwide expert on not only Alzheimer's disease, but all sorts of neurodegenerative conditions. Dr. Bredesen, in the process of studying Alzheimer's, realized you probably never make a drug to cure the disease because it would have to do all of this stuff. And you can't make one drug that will do that many things. It's kind of like trying to patch a hole with multiple, or trying to patch a roof with multiple holes in it, or a boat with a lot of holes in the hull. And you're repeatedly just patching one hole and then measuring. Did we stop the house from leaking? Did we stop the boat from sinking? It's an approach that really doesn't make sense when you think of it in those terms. And Dr. Bredesen finally understood some of the signaling mechanisms that were going on in the Alzheimer's brain. And he said, wait a minute, this process starts long before symptoms show up, decades before, and we're not intervening early enough. And it's not caused by just one factor. There are 36 to 50 things that are affecting the brain and influencing whether it's healthy or not. But we could measure those things. Everything that's circled on this slide is measurable, and arguably we can influence just about everything on this slide. Many of these things are influenced by lifestyle factors that we've known for years affect your risk of Alzheimer's disease. If you're type 2 diabetic, you got about a 50% greater chance. If you had an early hysterectomy and never did hormone replacement, you've got a greater than 50% higher risk of Alzheimer's disease than the general public. That's why 2 out of 3 Alzheimer's patients are women, by the way. They're at greater risk because of higher incidence of hormonal deficiencies. We've known for a long time that exercise can reduce Alzheimer's risk. Are any of those things by themselves a cure for Alzheimer's? They're not. We know that all sorts of nutrients impact brain health. If your B12 level is really deficient, it's going to affect your cognitive functioning. But if you test B12 against a placebo, is it a cure? Nope, it's not. But Dr. Bredesen said, wait a minute. All of these things matter, but they matter together. They don't matter separately. Let me share with you a lesson from the Cheesecake Factory. Years ago, I was at the Cheesecake Factory on Valentine's Day with my wife, Amy. It happens to be her birthday, so I get a 2-for-1 special. We were sitting by the window, and we looked over the menu, and we both decided that we wanted salmon. So we placed our orders. She was going to get one salmon dish. I was going to get another. We were going to split it. Well, about 2 minutes went by and the server came back and her head was hung low. She was kind of shaking her head and I knew what was coming out of her mouth before she said it. We're out of salmon. Well, it was Valentine's Day at lunchtime and it wasn't even noon yet. We got there early so we could get a good seat. I thought, man, you're going to have a tough day. We ordered something different and halfway through the meal, I looked out the window and I said, honey, there's our salmon. The Ocean Beauty seafood truck was circling in the parking lot. And she said, well, do you think we could send this back? I really wanted salmon. And I said, no, we can't. They're not delivering. And I thought, this is strange. What's going on? I got up and I actually went and investigated a little bit. I was able to look around the side of the building from where we were, and I could see that the bread truck was parked in the loading area. So the seafood delivery was just waiting for the bread truck to move. Now, if what you need in the restaurant is salmon to offer everything on the menu, then whether that loading area is empty or the bread truck is blocking the pathway, either way, there's no salmon in the restaurant. Now, I want you to compare your brain to the Cheesecake Factory. Cheesecake Factory has a really extensive menu. And Dr. Smith went through a long list of all these different cognitive domains and everything that the brain has to accomplish. And we all know that intuitively because we all have a brain and we do lots of stuff that the brain controls. So it's kind of like there are a lot of things on the menu, but there are a lot of things that need to be in the pantry to be able to offer it. So imagine what happens if some of the deliveries don't show up. If salmon doesn't show up, they can't offer salmon. And a memo goes out to the restaurant, hey, we got no more salmon right now. That's a problem. But the restaurant still keeps running. But what happens if the vegetable delivery doesn't come? And what happens if they don't deliver any flour or eggs or sugar? And now you can't make cheesecake at the Cheesecake Factory. Pretty soon, all you're left with is a grilled cheese sandwich. And that's kind of stretching it. And you've had to lay off a lot of the staff, and you're barely keeping the doors open until finally you say, well, that's it. We got to close down the restaurant. That's kind of how the brain works. And one of the things that Dr. Bredesen decided to do was, why don't we just measure everything that should be on the pantry shelf, so to speak, in this restaurant called the brain? And let's just replace everything. Let's optimize everything that we possibly can and make sure that we are as optimal as we can possibly be in all of those areas. If you're just joining us, be sure and mute yourself. All right. So Dr. Bredesen did this experiment. He did a pilot trial back in 2014. And he published the results in a paper called Reversal of Cognitive Decline, a Novel Therapeutic Program. In the process, he took 10 people, and those 10 people all had some sort of a diagnosis, mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's disease. He did cognitive testing. He collected a lot of information on them, and he did a very broad panel of labs. He looked at lifestyle factors, and then he implemented a very personalized plan to help them improve. He said, hey, you're deficient in these 10 things, so you need to replace them. And he said, let's get you exercising better. Let's make sure that you sleep well. Let's make sure that you eat in brain healthy ways. And on, he just went down the list for each individual person. And 9 out of the 10 patients had a remarkable improvement. One man, for example, was 66 years old. He had progressive complaints of memory loss. He had an MRI that was consistent with Alzheimer's disease. He had a PET scan. In fact, his MRI showed that the memory center of his brain was down in the 17th percentile volume-wise. Well, after 10 months of treatment, the memory center of his brain measured in the 75th percentile. And it was so astounding that the neuroradiologist who read the report said, this is not possible. This doesn't happen. And so they sent off the MRI to another lab to read the results using a different computer program. And they came back and said, no, it actually started in the 10th percentile and wound up in the 90th percentile. I don't care whether you're talking about going from the 17th to the 75th or the 10th to the 90th. This guy got a lot of his brain functioning back. And then he maintained it. And Dr. Bredesen recognized that this is unprecedented. So he did it again with another pilot trial with 10 people and got very similar results for people. And then he published a paper with 100 patients. And then just this year, he did an institutional review board approved trial with 3 different trial sites and a bunch of different patients. And they followed them for 9 months. And 84% of those patients improved an average of 5 points on a Montreal Cognitive Assessment, the same test that Dr. Smith showed you earlier. That is unprecedented. That's absolutely remarkable. So how does that compare with other interventions? You can see on this graph over here that without any treatment, we expect that someone with cognitive problems will decline about 3 points every 9 to 12 months on a 30-point test. And they tested a drug called donanemab at the same time, and that slowed the decline just a little bit. The roof stopped leaking as fast, but they still lost an average of 2 points every 9 months. But the people that participated in a multimodal approach that just looked at all the root causes, looked at all the things that needed to be on the pantry shelf and replaced all of them, all the holes in the roof that needed to be patched, they improved an average of 5 points. And 3 people in the trial went from a score of 19 out of 30 to 30 out of 30. That was pretty unprecedented. It led Dr. Bredesen to say Alzheimer's disease should be a rare disease, as rare as leprosy or polio. When is the last time you met somebody with leprosy? At least in this country. It doesn't happen. We now understand a lot about the things that drive Alzheimer's disease. Well, this is a picture of Dr. Bredesen with my business partner. Randy Vaudry is the Chief Medical Officer of A Mind for All Seasons. And he's trained with Dr. Bredesen. He's trained with other top neurologists and endocrinologists in the country. And he has gathered all of their data together, all of their research, all of their approaches, and he's put it into a system that we have used with hundreds of people all over the country in the last few years. And many of those people actually live in assisted living facilities. And we've tried to change the way that healthcare is delivered in those spaces. So we have a lot of data on a lot of people. And what we see with that data is that what gets labeled Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia or Lewy body dementia or Parkinson's dementia, all these different types of dementing illnesses, actually, when you do lab work, it looks very different from person to person. With Alzheimer's, for example, some people have elevated inflammatory markers. Their body's just on fire with inflammation. Some of that is driven by what you might call glycotoxicity. Alzheimer's is nicknamed diabetes of the brain because about 80% of Alzheimer's patients have a lot of insulin resistance in the brain. So that's kind of a factor that drives inflammatory dementia. It's also a factor unto itself. If you're diabetic, you're much more likely to have cognitive problems because you become resistant to insulin signaling. Insulin is what delivers sugar into the cell where our little energy factory, the mitochondria, can produce energy. And so you wind up with a situation where it's like a stranded car on the side of the road, and you pull over to help the car, and you notice, even though the gas tank is empty, there are 7 cans of gas around the car. And you say, oh my gosh, you got plenty of gas here. What's going on? And the driver says, I broke the spout. I can't get the gas into the tank. That's basically what insulin resistance is. It's not a problem of fuel. People will crave sugar. They'll eat 50 cookies if you let them. They have plenty of sugar in their bloodstream. They just can't deliver it where it needs to go. If you don't put gas in the tank, the engine won't run. Other people have an atrophy style dementia, an atrophic dementia. They're very hormonally depleted. They're freezing cold all the time. Their thyroid doesn't work well. They're often people that had early hysterectomies. They're also often people that had a head injury that damaged the pituitary gland, that damaged the 35 plus hormones that are really active in the brain and the signaling for those hormones. Some people develop Alzheimer's symptoms at a young age, and they don't even have the genetics for it. Their risk should be a lot lower. And often they are the picture of health in every other way. They might be marathon runners. They might eat super clean. They're definitely not insulin resistant. And you look at them and you think, why is your brain declining? Until you do more extensive testing and you find out, oh, you've got lead toxicity. You've got herbicides and pesticides and plastics and molds and all kinds of things that can build up in the system. And if you got a problem like that, your brain is going to pay for it. Some people have compromised blood flow. Other people are really primarily dealing with the effects of head injury. So I want to give you just a few slides to show what happens when you collect a lot of data on a lot of people, because I think it points the way to what anybody can do to protect their brain. So I've deliberately chosen here people that already have significant impairment, who have improved by doing the right kinds of things. That doesn't mean they're cured. We do not have a cure for Alzheimer's disease. We don't have a cure for other types of dementia, but we can help them get a lot better. And like Dr. Smith was saying earlier, and like I mentioned at the beginning, if we intervene early, it's a lot easier to prepare and prevent than repair and repent. So these labs were taken from one building in an assisted living company that has many different campuses in various parts of the Northwest. And on those campuses, they have often multiple buildings. The company is called Guardian Angel Homes, and they license our process from A Mind for All Seasons. So we write all their treatment summaries. We help them get their lab work. We train their team members. And at this particular property in Richland, Washington, out of 26 residents, only 8 of them had the so-called Alzheimer's gene. So just because you don't have it doesn't mean that you're in the clear. Just because you do have it doesn't mean that you're doomed. It's actually neither a victory nor a defeat. It just tells us something about how your body responds to sugar, and it tells us something about your likelihood of mounting a strong inflammatory response. One of the things that's interesting is this MTHFR genetic problem. I'm not going to get into the detailed science of that, but that has to do with how your body uses B vitamins, which are critical to brain functioning. And all of these levels, all of these people in pink have some genetic problems that make it harder for them to use B vitamins. This is a much higher incidence than the general population. So they're already impaired. They're already in a facility. That says something. If you've got genetics like that, it elevates risk, because if you don't use B vitamins properly and you're not doing something about that, it's going to affect your brain. Well, the treatment for that is actually really simple. It's an over-the-counter supplement. It just has to be the right one, and it has to be monitored. We could do something about that for people. Inflammation is a factor. Well, look at the level of inflammation here. Everyone in pink has highly elevated inflammatory markers. Some of these are dramatically elevated, many, many times higher than they should be. So that's a problem. Now, this group, interestingly, has a lot lower average sugars than many of the places where we go. And the reason why is that this company changed the way that they feed their residents about a month before they got lab work done on all of the residents in this building. And by then, we already saw a significant change in the average sugars for these residents. So how we eat is key. How about an atrophy style dementia? Again, all of these things in pink are not where they should be. Look at vitamin D. Did you know that vitamin D influences over 1,000 genes in the body? It's a hormone, even though we call it vitamin D. And just to give you an idea of how important it is, there's really good research in top flight medical journals that shows if women have a vitamin D level that's 50 to 55 nanograms per milliliter, which I wouldn't even call optimal, that alone reduces their breast cancer risk by 83%. That's pretty dramatic. We could go through a long list of all the things that vitamin D influences, but practically everybody on this list was not optimal in their vitamin D. Now, how important are some of these vitamins? Well, if you're B12 deficient, you're more likely to have psychosis. These two areas we circled in bold red because they're so glaring. Pregnenolone is the master hormone for the brain, and DHEA comes from pregnenolone. Every last person in this facility that we tested was painfully suboptimal. An optimal level of pregnenolone would be 150 to 200. These people are at 13 and 10 and 25 and 10 and on and on. Very, very depleted hormones. Now, some people think hormones are the devil. We don't have a ton of time to get into it, but I will say that if you look at the North American Menopause Society, they focus on actual numbers instead of just hyperbole. The Women's Health Initiative study years ago said, hormone replacement causes 100% increased risk of blood clots. And they're right, it does. But out of 1,000 patients on a placebo in that study, the rate of blood clots was 0.8 in 1,000. And for those taking synthetic hormones in the study, the rate of blood clots was 1.9 in 1,000. That's a 100% increase. But the North American Menopause Society wisely points out, You got to consider relative risk. If you double the probability of a rare event, it's still rare. If you buy 2 lottery tickets instead of 1, you got a 100% increased chance of winning the lottery, but you're still not going to win. Now, when people say, what can you do for Alzheimer's disease? There's nothing that you can do, right? There's no way to prevent it. There's nothing that you can do. I want you to think of a slide like this. This slide captures all the things that we currently do to help people improve their brain health. Now, that's not a guarantee. We can't guarantee anything to anybody. But there's a ton of stuff that can be done to make sure that you have all the ingredients in the pantry, that you've patched as many holes in the roof as you possibly can. And if you do it early enough in life, a lot of the top researchers out there say, yep, it's preventable. Richard Isaacson is a neurologist at Cornell University in New York, and he fought hard for years to convince the university to let him create an Alzheimer's prevention clinic. They laughed at him. They said, you can't prevent Alzheimer's disease. And he said, yeah, you're not reading the current research. There's a lot of stuff coming together and you can prevent it. You have to do the right things, and it has to be a multimodal approach. Well, finally, he got approval to do it. And now there are multiple locations because he does good work. And his efforts do pay off for people. So as we wrap up, before I turn things back to Dr. Smith, and before we answer any questions that you have, I want you to hear from some people that are probably a lot like many of you. We have permission to talk about them. This is Dave and Deb Jensen. And I actually just had a coaching session with them today. I've been working with them for a couple of years now. And Dave was the executive vice president of one of the largest commercial insurance companies in the country. He had clients like American Airlines and Discover Card. And he started developing serious cognitive symptoms in his late 50s. Now, he was a PE major in school, and he has always been a good exerciser. And he and Deb have always eaten well. They've taken care of themselves. They've done everything humanly possible to try to live a good life. And his brain started deteriorating to the point that he couldn't function at work. He had to hire an assistant, and that was not enough. And pretty soon, he found himself having gone to multiple doctors who diagnosed him with early onset Alzheimer's disease, including going to the Mayo Clinic. They did a full workup and said, yep, you've got Alzheimer's. I'm sorry, there's not much we can do for you. Hopefully you'll be lucky and it won't move too quickly. But early onset often moves a little bit faster than later onset Alzheimer's disease. Well, at the time that I started working with Dave, it was difficult for him to engage. He couldn't follow the conversation. He wasn't participating in family gatherings very much because he couldn't follow the conversation. He was sullen, he was withdrawn. He couldn't really get himself around because he would get lost. And he was devastated that he was forced into an early retirement. We went through all of his blood work. We looked at every hole in the roof we could find, including looking for toxic exposures, which tend to be more related to early onset. And we found high levels of mold in his system. And we found a lot of pesticides because he lives right next to an orange grove in Phoenix, Arizona. As we worked with him and started correcting those problems, we started seeing major changes. And I'm going to let him and Deb tell you about some of the rest of their story, at least to the point that this was recorded about a year ago. And he's actually doing a lot better than this. I need to re-record something because their changes have been really impressive.
What kinds of changes have you both noticed as this has gone on? Maybe, Dave, we could start with what you've noticed in yourself and how you have felt about participating in the enhanced protocol. And then, Deb, let's get some feedback from you as well.
I'm stronger. I'm not going to say I'm lifting weights stronger, but physically I can see better, I can hear better, and I can express myself much better verbally.
I was a little bit skeptical because this has been a death sentence. I mean, even now, people hear and they send me little crying emojis. We're so sorry about your husband. I'm like, because you don't know what you're talking about. But so I was skeptical. And every week, Eric would call us and how's it going? I'm like, it's not. This is not happening. All we're doing is not eating sugar. And I just don't see the incremental growth. But when you live with someone 24/7, it's hard to see that. But all of a sudden, in the last month or two, I've got my husband back. And his sense of humor, his sarcasm, which actually was a nice vacation, not having that for a while, but he's back. And we're not out of the woods. I don't want to pretend that everything's wonderful, but he is back, and we engage in conversation, and he plays with the grandkids, and it's been remarkable. And it was like just turned on like a couple of months ago. Both these neurologists before, I mean, Mayo Clinic, you can't get better than Mayo Clinic, but it was like a Band-Aid. Here, do you want the Cinderella Band-Aid or the Batman Band-Aid? Because that's all we had. And it wasn't, nothing to do with diet or stress level. Dave's stress level was off the charts. You guys just went through every nook and cranny of his health and life and sleep and stress level, and it's made a gigantic difference. Why? And it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense.
What?
Well, I never get tired of seeing that. And there's another interview that we could watch, but we got a late start because of our technical difficulties. So I'm not going to share that unless people want to see it. But I think it's important that maybe we answer some questions. There are probably things that you're wondering about, because we've just dumped a whole bunch of information in your laps. But I think in scratching the surface, one of the things that we want you to take away from this is that anybody can take control of their brain health. We do not have to be victims of life and circumstances. We can proactively measure things and do something about it. And a few years ago, in 2018, the largest health system here in Idaho, the St. Luke's Health System, invited Dr. Bredesen to be a guest speaker at the Wood River Foundation in Sun Valley, Idaho. And there were about 400 people in attendance. Randy and I were there. And at the end of his lecture about all of his research, a woman stood up in the Q&A and said, "So what's the one thing that we could do to take care of our brains and prevent Alzheimer's disease?" And you could almost feel his eyes roll, because he had just spent an hour explaining why there's not one thing. It requires a multimodal approach. And so I thought, wow, how's he going to handle this one? Because it felt like this lady just didn't get the point. But his answer was brilliant. He said, the most important thing that anybody could do to protect their brain and prevent Alzheimer's disease is to get their labs done and patch the holes in the roof and do something about it early. Get some cognitive testing as a baseline, do some eye tracking testing or other things to understand neurologically how you're doing, and get your blood work done. And then work with a qualified professional to help fix those problems and correct everything that you possibly can. And if you do that, we will save a ton of lives, including yours. Well, think about what that means. Randy and I were really impacted by that. We said we need to make a system that makes it easy for as many people as possible to just do that. So we actually work with clients all over the country, and we often partner with people just like Dr. Smith, who have a strong background in this. They understand a functional medicine approach. They're able to do a lot of testing. They're able to support people through the process. So Dr. Smith and I and our teams have worked together to create a process that anybody in your area can take advantage of. Anybody in that Utah area that can come into the office there can benefit from this. So we'd love to answer any questions that you have about that, and see what other questions that you might have related to the science that we dumped in your laps tonight. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a minute here, so that if anyone wants to talk, you're welcome to just unmute yourself and talk. If you push the space bar, you'll be able to unmute. As you're thinking about that and formulating questions, Dr. Smith, what would you say as we're kind of wrapping up and getting ready for questions?
Well, I have to admit, with all my background in functional medicine and neurology, when I heard about your program, I was like, I'll have to see. I'll have to go through it myself and see what I can really find. And I was literally shocked. I've done dozens of seminars in functional medicine. I probably have over 1,000 hours postgraduate in neurology. Plus, I have recently received my master's in neuroscience. I've done so much study, and I've never seen. I mean, I've actually, in my mind, tried to put together a program like this, but it's just too overwhelming. I was like, I can't do it all. So that's why I'm like, I need to get in touch with you guys and join forces and see if we can help some people. I think I just want to emphasize, you talk about all the multimodal approach, but it's not just all those things all at once. It's like, because we are what we repeatedly do. So we have to do the things over time, which means you have to change habits. And in order to change habits, you have to change routines. And so that's really, what I've been studying is how do we make it appropriate for people to actually change their routines. And I feel like we've done a good job. We've treated a handful of cases together at this point, and including my own self. And I feel like we're on the right track.
Yeah. I love partnering with providers like you, where your own patients that already know you, they love you, you've done awesome things for them, can get help with this. And A Mind for All Seasons is just kind of in the background. We write the treatment summaries, we help make sure the labs get done, we provide training for the staff, but really the people that you're serving are going to interact with your office and all the people that they already know, which is, I think, super exciting for them. It allows people to be a lot more comfortable with it.
Yes. Sherry, did you have a question?
Yeah, where's the book? We just come in and see you. Where do I start?
Basically what we'll do, you live several hours away. We're glad to do a Zoom session with you. And we just need to discuss and see, what are your goals? What do you feel is your weak spot? What are your goals? What would you like to achieve? And then we just order the tests from there. A lot of the cognitive testing I can send you remotely. And then we can get the orders through Randy and Eric for some of the more comprehensive labs. I do comprehensive labs compared to most medical offices, but you'll be surprised when you see the comprehensive nature of this. I was literally shocked. There was at least 30 things that I just forgot to do on myself because I didn't think it was that important, but it's really, really thorough. So just to call our office and set up a time, and we'll set up a consultation with you, and we'll go through it and then make a plan. Let you know all the details and the costs and what it entails. And with you being distant, we may have to find some ways to have you do some of the things remotely too.
Okay, sounds good. I'll be in touch.
So this is one of my patients who only drives 2.5 hours to come up and see me every so often.
Oh, that's awesome.
Pretty cool.
Well, we'll be excited to support you any way that we possibly can, Sherry. And just for everybody's benefit, it's a straightforward thing that can be done remotely. I have experience working with people literally from Maine to California, and we're actually working on taking this to the UK right now. So you can do things remotely and make a big difference for people.
Great. I'm looking forward to it so I can help the people that I work with too. I'm a massage therapist, and
nice.
And I consult with and coach different people on different health aspects, and so yeah, everyone out there needs to know this, no matter what age you are.
Yeah, fantastic. Stephanie, did you have a question?
I sure did. So Dr. Smith knows us well, and I think my daughter was probably his first brain issue. They're back in the day. She'll be 17 this month, and she was 18 months when she had her massive concussion.
I was just remembering.
And Dr. Smith worked miracles. So is this something that would be helpful for her? Yes.
This is something.
I mean, is there an age where you say that's a little early to start, or is this something that, as much as I can fund, I should just bring everybody in like I do on my regular time for everybody to have a checkup?
Like I said, it's based on what kind of symptoms she's having, but also what kind of things we're looking to prevent. I know we've had several different issues. We've worked with her recently, and I personally have never done it on someone that young, a 17-year-old, but she does have a history of a brain injury as a 1.5-year-old, which affected multiple brain regions that we are able to sort of get back on track. So what do you say, Eric? Is that something that you would recommend for a 17-year-old girl?
Yeah, I do have experience working with people that age, and we've seen some remarkable things. Oftentimes, I mentioned in the presentation that a brain injury can affect the pituitary gland, which affects a lot of hormonal signaling. And there are many hormones that we don't even check in our baseline enhanced protocol lab panel normally. But when we find out that someone has a history of a brain injury, there's actually a little pivot that we make, because Randy has trained and is one of the only providers in the Pacific Northwest, or actually the whole Western US, that has training in how to understand the complexities of the hormones in the brain. There are about 35 different hormones that you have to take into account. And as we've done this with people that are 17, 18, 19, and early 20s, that were depressed and suicidal and not sleeping and having major mental health problems, we've seen phenomenal turnarounds. I have a client right now that's 21 years old, and she is off of her lithium. She was diagnosed bipolar. She had attempted suicide, and she's off the meds. She's dating. She's just crushing it in college, doing really, really well. She's happy. It changed her life. And recently her dad sent me a text message, and he said that they were talking to their son, who was out of the country on a mission trip for his church. And he was asking the kids, so what are you grateful for, and what is evidence of God in your life? And her answer was, Eric and the team at A Mind for All Seasons, which was so gratifying to me, that she didn't even believe in God when she started this. She thought there's no way that God even lives. So, I'm not trying to get into a religious discussion here, but it kind of highlights the change that can take place for an individual, even at a very young age. And I just get so excited about that.
Sorry, we're loud in the background here.
So short answer is absolutely. Now, if anyone's wondering, well, what about my younger kids or my grandkids? Hormonal levels change a lot when you're prepubescent and going through early puberty. That gets tricky. It's not easy to draw a bunch of blood from kids. That's not something that we typically do. My youngest client right now is 9, but we're not doing a ton of blood work with her. There are therapeutic devices like Dr. Smith has in his office that are very helpful. There are some things that we can do in terms of some high-level advanced supplements based on symptoms. So there's still a way to help, but you don't want to take 14 vials of blood from a 9-year-old. Okay, any other questions? All right.
Fantastic. I think that's a wrap.
Okay, well, thank you.
I have one more question. Are we going to be able to get access to the replay of this, that we can share it with other people?
Definitely, we'll make that possible.
Okay. Sounds great. It's the first step of getting people convinced that this is something they need to look at, I think.
Yes, education is a big step, but I think we need to not minimize cognitive decline anymore. Like Eric mentioned, we joke about it, we tease each other about it, but it's something we have to take seriously. And we only got one brain, we need to take care of it.
Yeah. And Sherry, I appreciate that you recognize that it's a process to help people understand that there is a different pathway. There's new understanding out there. I look at the history of medicine and some of the changes that have taken place, and it's taken a painfully long time to get information out. There was a study done not too many years ago that showed from the time a new treatment is developed until it becomes standard clinical practice, on average, it takes 17 years. But when you look at things like every woman now that's had children in the last, I don't know how many decades, has been told to take a prenatal vitamin because they need the folate. Because if you don't have enough folate, the kids are likely to develop neural tube defects. Well, it took 30 years from the time that all of that research came out for that to become standard clinical practice. That's crazy. So we do need to get the word out about these things and let people know that there are things that they can do to take charge of their brain health.
Yeah.
So thanks for watching, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. So if you're interested in
on.
more
Appreciate it.
information, please just call our office, email our office, and we will get you scheduled for a consultation, and we'll find out what your goals are and find out how we can make it work for you.
Yep, here's the contact information if you need that. Okay, thanks again, everybody.
Thank you so much.